Harriet Sams, welcome to Shrink Wrap Radio.
Thank you so much for having me, Izzy. It's lovely to be here.
Well, you have such wide-ranging interests, ecotherapy, archaeotherapy, but let's start with your story. How did you find yourself going down these paths?
The very beginning of being well in myself and being feeling the most authentically me, I think, was always from a very young child out in nature. So I think I was one of those children who didn't want to be in the house come rain. Well, I don't remember it ever being rainy or wintry, but I remember very distinctly that I always made a beeline for being outside. We were very lucky. I grew up in East Sussex, actually in the Weald, which had forests and rivers and open pastures, and so I could easily get to these sort of wild spaces. And so I have a very strong memory of being well, being peaceful, being myself in that natural landscape. No matter what was going on in the family dynamics in the house, there was always a place for me. So I think really my trajectory as a grown-up and then as an academic and as a professional is always actually about being able to return to a sense of being connected to the land. And I think that as time's gone on, I first started out as an archaeologist, as a field archaeologist, because I had that really strong feeling of being connected, that I wanted to be connected, literally grounded in the ground with my hands in the dirt. And then feeling that was only answering part of it, because the mental aspect of being a field archaeologist is quite reductionist, it's quite systematic, and there's a lot of theory and a lot of sort of process. So I felt that being an archaeology background wasn't the whole answer, but it was very much part of it. And I realized that the sort of softer side of belonging to the land was missing. And so that was when I started exploring that, really, and noticing, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, that there wasn't really a language about earth-based connectedness, especially not in sort of therapeutic language. And it wasn't obvious, although there had been a lot of literature and a lot of work already been done in sort of deep ecology and things like that. So I think, I sort of really moved from having this hunch that the world was speaking to me as a child, that I felt safe there, I felt like I belonged, I felt like there was a resonance there, into sort of reductionist field archaeology, and then into this sense of what's really going on, what do I really want to get closer to with this? Is it my ancestors and the historical record and the archaeological record, or is it that connection, that sort of sense of belonging? And so as the years have gone by, I've sort of retrained in ecotherapy, in green economy as well, working out the how to, on a cultural level, on an economic level, how to guide our behavioral patterns in a more kind of cultural way. And so now, fast forward to now, my role is I'm a trained ecotherapist, which is sort of environmental practices to help people feel connected to the landscape, very much on a sort of basic level, like people just needing a little bit of nature connection because they live in cities and they need to just get out and about, or the more deeper, nuanced levels of more emergent animist connections to sense deeper sort of psychological nuances that the landscape can offer. So that's kind of where I'm at the moment with things.
It's such an interesting journey, and one of the labels is archaeotherapy. And how would you sort of define that? Because I know you do run some courses that sort of are under this kind of heading. So what would that look like if someone were to go to an archaeotherapy course or attend an archaeotherapy course?
Okay, so I will assume that people listening to this might know a little bit about eco-psychology or ecotherapy, but as a very, very broad background, there's quite a lot now out there to be able to access earth-based therapeutic practices that would be called ecotherapy or eco-psychology. So they would be connecting to, or being within a more than human world that includes animals, plants, basically non-human and elements within the wider world. So as I was training and coming from an archaeological point of view, although I was training just on the outskirts of Leicester, which is very much a human-changed landscape, where there's, straightened rivers and deforested areas and roads and all sorts of things. So it's totally not a natural environment, but it would be what I would call a sort of plagioclimax, where the natural way of being has been radically changed, and then it's managed at a certain way which benefits humans, basically.
Right.
So what I was finding when I was going through this training was that there was just an assumption that there was nowhere for the human heritage story to sit. And so as I was thinking about this, it wasn't, I don't think it was particularly obvious, because there was always a sense of work with the human landscape. If you find a brick wall, that's part of the language and things. But so it was a sort of it was an assumed part of it, but it wasn't made overt that most of the landscapes that ecotherapists or eco-psychologists are working with have actually got a human heritage story within them. So as I was thinking about that, I was thinking, well, if the focus was put on noticing that the landscape that you're in has all these natural aspects to it, trees and plants and animal tracks and those sort of, and obviously the elements and the weather and all of those sort of geological aspects. But if we foregrounded the human heritage side of things, what would change about the quality of the mirroring that was happening? And by that, what I mean is being able to go to a forest, for instance, and being able to see, say, an oak in a way that tells you a lot about who you are and about your relationality to the world is extremely important, and it's very rich, and there is a relationship that can be built with a non-human. However, there's a different quality to when you go somewhere and there's human heritage mirroring you, and it asks other questions with a different focus. It asks questions such as, what's the story of this landscape, and is that a story that is powerfully beneficent, or is it extractive, or is it colonial, or is it healing, is it divisive, is it inclusive? So there's actually the landscape then becomes more about understanding human ways of living on the earth, and then so actually the mirroring is different, and so there's much more of a kind of sociological conversation that begins and happens. But even sort of deeper than that, and really at the absolute core of it, which I think really comes up in sort of prehistoric sites more than, say, industrial sites or medieval sites, purely because the human landscape remains are almost so subtle that they have become ecology again. But there's a point in time where we can actually see that the human ecology divide stops, and there becomes the re-enmeshment. And so what happens is the humans are no longer this kind of dominant figurative sort of power upon the land, there is actually a point in time when the human story is part of how we see the world and how we interact with the world, where we actually see where we become one in our own heritage. And that point in time for me as a prehistoric archaeologist is absolutely fascinating. And I think that's what really goes back to that very early childhood feeling of being at one with the natural world, although I was, obviously in a very human-made, changed plagioclimax. And I think that can often be such an important place for a participant or a group to reach, because all of the kind of the sort of the crap or the challenges or the pain that they've excavated through to get to that point almost dissolves, and it becomes quite unnecessary, because we've returned back to that real truth, which is humans in the world are one and the same, and it's the trajectory that's separated us is really only a very short period of time. However, even though it's only a short period of time, it's a very powerful and very important period of time to be brought to.
So what sort of issues do people come to these kind of courses or these kind of practices with? What are they looking for? What are they looking to find? Or do they come with all different reasons and end up sort of feeling the healing benefits of the same sense of truth and connection?
That's a great question, and I think it's something that I'm still working to understand. Currently, I am, as you said, I'm researching this as a field, at an emergent field in a sort of therapeutic basis, and so things like finding out the boundaries of the participant suitability are very much in progress. So far, I've run 3 archaeotherapy group practices together for a couple of months, sort of 6 weeks group process. And in that time, the participants have, as you say, they've varied very much in their need. I think there's a general need to reconnect. So there's that sort of a lot of people say, I'm just really interested in how archaeology and ecotherapy can be merged into something therapeutic. So that's the kind of standing point. And then a couple of more personal reflections of, I've gone through a personal experience of pain, grief-filled experience, and I feel that there's something in the landscape that can be my healer. So I would like to have a bit of guidance. So there's those sort of things that come at the very beginning. But what I try to do and try to engender very much comes from archaeological process, which is it's chronological and stratigraphical. Sorry, one of those words.
Easy for you to say.
So, which is very much sort of in the McGilchrist kind of 2 hemispheres thinking is merging both the left brain and the right brain. So to say we can excavate through time, from the modern time, industrial archaeology, that kind of mess of how we've got to where we are, and then into sort of medieval, deeper time, beyond our known family history time, where there's these kind of pulses and impulses of family or cultural knowing, but we're not that sure of what it looks like, but we can go and explore that and see the sort of deeper but familiar still things that are coming up in our modern lives. And then we go down through into deep time prehistory. And as that process goes on, and these layers of uncovering, we sort of using a left-brained stratigraphic, logical, sequential process to excavate through time. But actually, as we do that, the right brain, the kind of the more conceptual, the more sort of meta-narrative part of the brain becomes more and more valued. And it's so all sorts of things become uncovered or make sense for the individual. COVID, of course, and being online when trying to do group process and this sort of thing is fascinating, because of course you'd think that with anything to do with the land, you'd all have to be out on the land.
Yes.
So when COVID hit, and it was like, okay, how do we do ecotherapy or land-based therapeutic practices where everybody's stuck in a room staring at the computer screen? But actually, it's turned out to be really almost more meaningful, because the people's landscape becomes very personal. It becomes really granular to the individual. So we then meet as a group, we share our own stories, and then each time we then have a practice. I'll say, so this week, or this 2 weeks in between calls, go out to the land and ask, you know, this question, or go or explore this aspect. And because it's land specific for that individual, relationship becomes deeply personal and more nuanced, without once digging a hole. So there's no excavation to it. It's all about relationship. And also, if it were in a, say, like a kind of mutually agreed place in the landscape for a week's workshop, certainly these things could be done. But of course, everybody would then disperse and they'd go about their daily lives wherever they were, 100 miles away, 300 miles away. But because, you know, at the end of the course, that person is with that landscape for years, for the rest of their lives, maybe, it does exactly what I would hope that any kind of earth landscape connection does, which is it's built a relationship, a real, you know, one that can be believed, because that person can just walk out their front door and go to that place.
One of the things I found, I read an article that you wrote on a Druidry website, and we'll get to Druidry in a moment because that's also fascinating. But in the article, you mentioned sort of ecotherapy as, I think the term was, it's other-centered. And that sort of struck me, because I often feel that so much is, you know, oh, it's all about me. You know, I'm talking about my past, I talk about my experiences, and the idea of the other-centered therapy just sort of struck me as sort of inspiring, and, you know, taking you out of yourself in a way that actually I feel could be very healing for people. What's the difference between an other-centered therapy and a self-centered therapy, to put it most blandly?
Well, other-centered therapy is very much the idea that it's not the person's individual mind, memories, experiences that hold the answers necessarily. That there's a triangle, a therapeutic triangle. There's the client, there's the facilitator stroke therapist, but then there's the location and the place. And in this case, it would be the earth, generally speaking, or a forest, or if you're talking archaeologically, archaeotherapeutically, it would be, say, a ruined castle. So that's your third, your other. But of course, it actually, it's a very simplistic noun for what is as wide as the cosmos, to be honest, because when we open up to the possibility of the other, it could be a kestrel that darts across, it could be a blackbird that calls, it could be vetch that you notice is in full bloom, it could be that you tripped up on a route, or it could be you say something and then a blast of wind goes across your face and that stops you in your tracks, because that's meaningful. So the other is actually everything I'm not a psychotherapist, and so I don't work in a group, in a client environment where, you know, we're in a room, in an office. So I wouldn't be able to tell you what sort of person-centered therapy would look like. However, I do know from colleagues who do work in that kind of clinical way, and from my own experiences with that kind of approach to therapy, is that there can often be a genuine worry about how you move from person-centered therapeutic practices into other-centered therapeutic practices, because quite frankly, the other can be anything and everything, and there's no control over that.
Yeah.
And so as a facilitator or you know, therapist or guide or mentor, whichever approach that you have in your profession, a coach, the acceptance of the unknown and the not knowing is actually one of the deeply important aspects of why this is such a useful and helpful approach to individuals and groups. Although it is quite, you know, it can potentially be quite worrying and quite nerve-wracking. Oh my gosh, what if it rains? What if a dog comes? What if, you know, of course these things have to be taken into consideration. But equally, those kind of things are all opportunities for exploration. So essentially the other-centered approach is where we are enmeshed in the earth, and that then again brings a very different quality to the participants' experience of what they deem then to be of therapeutic value.
I'm one of the, when you were mentioning, you know, the other could be the blackbird calling, or the because I spend quite a lot of time wandering around in woods and fields and crawling around under hedges and things, and on certain occasions so many things can seem incredibly sort of significant and meaningful to me, and there's always this uncertainty of whether I'm, you know, in a process of wish fulfillment or just sort of, you know, imagination, or, you know, that it's exactly what you said, that sort of like lack of control. I mean, if with a facilitator there, I'm sure there would be a sort of like different experience of questioning into those my interpretations of what's going on. But that must be a very sort of like hazy area for how, you know, how creative people can be with interpreting the significance of something that happens. And you know, you as a facilitator might be there thinking, gosh, I don't necessarily think that's the most helpful interpretation, or that's a particularly benevolent interpretation. And it strikes me that must be quite difficult to deal with. Presumably that's why you get training.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's very interesting with anything that's that can potentially be of difficulty. You know, I think that this very much comes up where that's a fear of, what if I can't control what then is the result of an interaction that comes from the natural world. And I think that this goes back to what you were saying about who is it right for? Who would you agree to work with? It's all about knowing the limits to the therapeutic training that you've had. If you think, right, do you know what's coming up is way beyond my ability to guide you and help you. So, you know, maybe this is for someone else. That's actually part of anyone's ethical way to approach anything, whatever their modality. For instance, you know, if you're a hydrotherapist, for instance, you wouldn't throw someone into the deep end if they'd never known how to swim before. You know, it's all about knowing that this is the root of it. It's knowing that your client is safe, as safe as you can be, but not like cotton wool safe, especially when you're working in the outdoors. And I think when you look wider at the kind of people's professions who are working outdoors, I think there's actually a part of risk relationship that is built into people who work in the outdoors. So that could be people who do wilderness rites of passage, vision quests, to bush craft training, and men's circles around fires. There's an aspect of wildness, and I think that's actually always been quite interesting to me, which again fascinates me about what it is about being human that welcomes that. So again, it's a sort of self-selection. Would I be interested in this sort of thing because I'm at the point in my life where there's a returning to a belonging that's the core of what's coming up, and with that, am I in a place, in a landscape, in a world, in a modality where I know that I'm safe to have difficult things arise?
Yes.
So, and I think that, say, for instance, let's say we're at a castle, and the castle has a particular history of a battle to do with a subjugation that happened with the local community, and that brings up for somebody a memory of when they were dominated or continually dominated, or domestic abuse or something like that comes up, and they are really powerful and valid points. And they need to be sat with, because the person wants to bring them, because it's important for their understanding of this kind of dynamic that's coming up in the landscape. And I think it goes to Donna Haraway, which I know that we've sort of discussed a little bit about Donna Haraway, and sort of staying with the trouble to honor that for that individual. If after a session it's clear that there's further deeper work that needs to be done, then perhaps there's a colleague that would be better suited for that. However, the root of earth-based sort of therapeutic guidance in any way is that the earth is there right for you to have a direct relationship. So your woundedness, your grief, your pain, everything that you are, your joys, your talents, your fantastic ability to be a mother, to be a friend, or all of those things, the earth meets you as you are. And that is quite powerful in itself. And so it is, it's about knowing that the earth sort of seen it all before, and it's writ large in the landscape. It's seen it all before. We've done it all before. It's there. And that's actually, that sort of goes back to the quality of the mirroring. If we see our own pain mirrored in the landscape, literally in ditches and walls, and there's a history that reflects our own, that quality, those qualities of that mirroring are so powerful that they are deeply healing.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's beautiful. I mentioned earlier Druidry, and I know that you are also a trained Druid. Something that many of our listeners might be sort of less familiar with. It's probably more of an English British tradition than American, for example. And you also wrote this article that was suggesting some sort of like alignments or connections, a sort of mutual recognition between the role of a druid and that of an ecotherapist, or that ecotherapy fitted well into the druidic tradition. So first of all, could you give us just a little understanding of what Druidry is, and how you feel that tradition aligns well with this idea of service and of healing using the earth as another?
Oh, well, yeah, it's for me, just to sort of absolutely get it straight with people who are listening to this about wondering what is it. For me, to be called a druid, I am a druid. For me, it's really important for me to have the study that went along with that, so that at the end of it, I could say it's almost like a sort of a vocation.
Mm-hmm.
Or almost like, but not the same as, a local vicar who has to go through the seminary to become a vicar who can then do marriages and deaths and that sort of thing. Because for me, it felt like it had to be a learning journey, so that I could understand what it was on a cultural level. So that there was a kind of service that I could be at the end, which would be called Druidic service. That includes baby naming ceremonies, weddings, funeral. I'm a trained funeral celebrant, so there's very much a service aspect of that. But along the way, there's a lot of training. So with the order that I'm in, called the Order of Bards, Ovates and Druids, which I'm sure I'll give you the link for, there's a sort of threefold type of training that you have to go through to become the druid, which in the traditional sense of the word would be advisor. So there'd be something political and philosophical about that. So that would be like where you're of service. But the first two phases aren't less important. They're just very, very necessary and qualities of their own in their own right. So the first one is the bard. So you learn how to be creative. You learn about the lore, the stories, the myths of the land and your own land, wherever you come from. And there's actually quite a lot of order members from America. So maybe get more American druids. That would be wonderful. So you learn about the bardistry, how to play an instrument, how to be an artist, how to be a poet. You learn about the heritage, the written heritage of where you come from. So you can sort of go, that reminds me of the story of Inanna or Rhiannon or Taliesin or King Arthur or, whatever. So there's the bardistry, which is, as I said, developing your own creativity. Then in the center is the period of training that took me the longest. And that was where I felt that the ecotherapy sat. And in fact, I made it part of my training. And that's called the ovate. And it's from the Latin vatus, which meant seer or diviner. So the ovate is the more, where I would probably put healer, herbalist, therapist, the person who would learn about herbs or about midwifery and childbearing and those sort of things. So imagine the kind of hedge witch at the edge of the village where everybody goes to for their ailments, for their rheumatism, or to help them with childbirth and things like that. So that took me the longest. And I think, and that was, as I said, and that article that you've read, which I promise I will rewrite because it needs updating. That was for me where ecotherapy in my training actually coincided, and it made so much sense that there was a therapeutic well-being for the human being that could be done in the wider natural world, where things like tree lore, obviously druids are quite synonymous with knowing about trees. So that was the grade, we call them grades, bard, ovate and druid grades. The ovate grade was one where I learned about not only the medicinal benefits of different trees. So for instance, silver birch is very good if you've got urinary tract infections. Oak is very good as an astringent. So if you've got cuts, you can take a bit of oak bark and it'll dry it out and help it stop. So there's like medicinal.
Anything good for menopause?
Menopause. You know what? I'm actually perimenopausal as well.
I'm perimenopausal.
And I've been doing some research, but do you know what? Typically, I've forgotten what I've learned. which is very menopausal. But but there are more herbs. There are more herbs, I think, than trees.
I think hawthorn was the only thing that I came across that even sort of like mentioned in passing, and that might have been for the flushes, hot flushes.
Because,
Hawthorn
yes, because it's now also holly for the hot flushes, but holly you have to be quite careful with because it's very fiery. So, but it does really help with regulating the heat. So often if you dry holly and sort of grind it up and then just put a little bit in to make a little bit of smoke in an incense, that can often help regulate. But because it's like we call it sympathetic magic, where what it looks like and has attributes in its physical life, it actually also has medicinal attributes. So it's very sharp and prickly, which is quite fiery, and obviously it's a midwinter evergreen, so it's got this kind of fire in the darkest nights of the year kind of energy. So it can actually potentially be helpful. Mugwort is very good for regulating estrogen as well. But as a contraindication, do not take mugwort tea if you're pregnant, because it can instigate a very strong instigation of menstruation. So there's
you learn all this through the ovate order.
Yes.
Wow.
And so there's this sacred herbs as well. So sage is just like sacred anyway, because it's fabulous, isn't it? But there's yarrow, there's vervain, there's mugwort, there's mistletoe, of course, and there's a couple of other ones that create what are seen as the kind of mystical, magical rites, the herbs of the rites of the Druids. But that's not the same as medicinal herbs. There's a massive like apothecary of that. But anyway, so going back to the ecotherapy,
yes,
but that's fine, because actually herb lore and herbalism is part of ecotherapy. People who are attracted to certain plants at certain times of year, if they then research and go, it's because I had a respiratory infection, and actually it turns out that was really good for healing respiratory infections. So there's actually part of ecotherapy is about knowing. It's all about relationship, quite frankly. All of this is about relationship. It's like kind of like human to human. What human resonates, or what human makes you think, don't want them in my life. It's the same with plants and trees and animals. We are in relationship constantly with our living world. And some just pass us by, and then some just go, whoa, where have you been? Oh my gosh, I've needed you in my life. And then because of the amazing wondrousness of our lives, we can usually Google or pick up a book, and other people done all this knowledge-based stuff, this wisdom keeping, that we can go, I'm attracted to that plant because of this, that, and the other. And so actually ecotherapy is about getting to know individual plants and their characteristics, properties, for a scientific way, but also for the magical, as I say, properties of why we're in a certain relationship with certain plants and certain animals and certain trees. And so yes, it's very, very ovate. So I did submit a paper to the Druids about that. Yeah.
And then the final order, the druid one, where does your learning go in that section of the education?
Yeah, so that is more moving towards service. Like, so you've got this, you're artistic, you're creative, you've got this sort of joie de vivre, and you want to express it. You've got this basis of knowledge about the earth and the plants and the cohabitors of this universe with you. And so now we're going to develop it into a spirit-based service. And I don't want to give any spoilers away, but there is an emphasis on philosophy and yes, a sort of service-based approach to being druidic, I would say. And I place myself probably 2/3 ovate, 1/3 druid. I think my main practice is it sort of straddles that section. some people I know who are absolutely firmly bards, and they love being bards, and they just play music. As you can see, got lots of musical instruments, and it's a massive part of my family's life. So they're real bards. I've also got friends who are just out and out ovates, and I would trust them to heal me with everything. And then I've got very, very almost otherworldly knowledge bearers that are just full druids, you know. So, and that's what I love about it. It's actually none of them are any better, or it's not like the bard is lowlier than the druid. It's like there's a wonderful intermeshing of all of them that make up service, really.
You described to me when we spoke before that the training, as well as being educational and inspirational, also has this self-discovery element. And I mean, I don't want to sort of pry into your personal life, but do you feel there was something therapeutic for you in going through that training, that in itself had a healing element to it?
For sure. I came to it from the archaeological point of view. So, when we started this conversation, I was saying that young child sitting in the darkness at the edge of the barn and just feeling very, very much like I belonged, which then went into field archaeology and the reductionist attitude of, you learn this and that came before that and that came before that, and that's how you interpret the archaeology. But there was always this hunch of like, our relationship to the land shouldn't be this transactional. It shouldn't be this, easy to define. There's something really messy about this, which it's so obvious now. We belong to the earth, and we came out of the earth, and we've got earth in our bones and minerals, and go coursing through our blood. It's really obvious. But I think for me, I needed to know that I wasn't alone feeling that, and so I'd academically and obviously professionally known about pre-Christian Western European Iron Age druidry from the Romans, and so I knew about, say, the festivals, the agricultural festivals of Samhain or Beltane, or so I had a knowing of them, but I didn't really understand them. And so I went to Waterstones in Carlisle and found this book. It literally just sort of leapt out. Everybody says this, but a book leapt out at me, and it was The Path of Druidry by a woman called Penny Billington. And I was extremely cynical. I was like, right, I'm a diehard academically trained archaeologist. If I get even the whiff of nonsense, I'm just putting this down and demanding my money back. But I really was genuinely happy and surprised and reassured that it absolutely this sort of approach firmly rooted itself in not reconstructing nonsense. It wasn't the Druids who built Stonehenge, those sort of things. It was all about earth-based spirituality and of our own, rather than appropriating and taking from other places. It was like, what does it really mean to be European? What does it really mean to have a mythology, a basis of mythology from Welsh mythology, from Nordic, from Scandinavian, from the ones from the Romans, the pantheon of the Romans, of course, and how they, even though they subjugated and colonized Britain, as they did it, enshrined British gods as they did it and Romanized them. So we've got a really good, strong idea of what we found was sacred, what language we still were using to define sacred parts of the world. So brigantes means of exalted one, or of a high place. And so she was of, like, the moorlands, the high places, but she was also exalted. Or Minerva Sulis, the Romanized goddess of the hot springs in Bath. So we know that the heat of the water coming out was sacred because we gave it a face, we gave it a name. So as I was reading this, I was thinking, okay, now this feels like what you can't excavate. This is not the stuff that's left behind. This is the intangibility of why people lived. And that was like coming home. It really did feel like, you know, the answers aren't in the stuff necessarily that I find, but when I find them and I get this overwhelming feeling of like this person from 3,000 years ago, that makes sense. You know, I found something that resonates in that way. So yeah, there was very much a sense of coming home, and I had to park, to a certain extent, I had to park that kind of rational professional aspect of me to fully embrace that I was going on a very different journey. You know, that this wasn't westernized, that even though it is Western sort of spirituality, it was not Christianized as such, although Christians are very welcome, and some I know Christian Druids, so that's, you know, there is a real overlap and a sensitivity and an understanding, but it was different, and it was, but it wasn't contradicting my professionalism. It was welcoming it in, and if there was ever, I had this feeling, although it never really came up and never needed to come up, but if I did ever come across something in the text that was clearly not from my experience academically or professionally, there would have been a welcome, you know, okay, thanks for letting us know. I think you can readjust what we've written. And so there was always this kind of porosity, non-dogmatic porosity to the course, which still exists today, you know, 12, 13 years later.
So this it seems to me as if it enables healing to come from anywhere. This sense of porosity, but you mentioned it envelops the whole cosmos, that you have this sort of sense of belonging in something so much bigger and so much faster. And it does feel as if that could certainly give people a very different feel about their lives to that, you know, atomized individual on their own going through an alien world. That does sound as if it's something that perhaps people need. Do you feel that there are more and more people who are searching for and reaching out to these different kinds of therapeutic modalities?
That's definitely for sure. There's been evidence from around about 2000 plus, that year 2000 onwards, that there's percentage-wise, there's more people either defining themselves as sort of Abrahamic faiths who are looking for an indigeneity in itself. But since COVID, the membership numbers of this particular order, which I can only talk about this particular order, but have, I think, tripled.
Wow.
in the people who want
wow.
who joined. Yeah, so we've gone from, you know, 5,000-10,000 members now to 25,000-30,000 membership. People who are saying, I've always thought there was either something different about the world and I want to learn more, or you know, I feel like this course can help me understand myself a little bit more, as you said, and as I was saying, that self-development aspect of like, who am I really? You know, I've played the game, I've got a job, I've had my kids, I've paid my mortgage. What's going on in the greater, deeper relationality? But I think underneath that, there is very much a thread where people are understanding that on a sort of global level, there is radical shift, radical change. Things are moving. What we once thought was stable and going to sort of hold us forever are now starting to shift. And so there is a definite move towards people understanding on a spiritual level a different way of being in relationship to the earth. And I think that something like Druidry, although there are other earth-based spiritualities and, you know, the eco-Christianity and other ways of approaching things are certainly helping to find the answers. I mean, I find myself very much privileged actually to be in this position where it feels like there's more and more of a need, and maybe you've found this with your podcasts, that there's more and more of a need for people to engage with another way of being in the world. And earth-based spirituality seems to me the obvious one, because I don't think that it's really going to be the humans per se that are going to fix it all. I think we have to be taught. We have to find another way of hearing, another way of being in relationship to something more than human, for some things, and for some uncomfortable mirroring actually to happen. And I feel very privileged to be in that position where hopefully with my research, I can certainly offer at least a way that can then go off and be practiced and researched further if necessary, about whether this ability to be in relationship to the wounded land, the challenged land, is indeed helpful. I mean, sort of maybe slightly going back to what we were saying before, my focus is not necessarily on one-to-one sort of personal development. I think there's other ways that are much more better focused than that, to be more specific about it. What really interests me is is not necessarily about the individual having a healing well-being experience, although that happens and that's part of it. What really interests me is giving and exploring ways in which the earth and the aspects of the non-human realm are more able to be heard by humans. That's really where my interest lies.
Yes. And I think that idea about behavioral change, you wrote in that article, in my opinion, one of the single most pressing things to address in the awakening of humans to the plight of this world is their individual relationship with and understanding of the natural world. So this kind of connection, this feeling, this sense of compassion and empathy might well encourage behavioral change and a different way of making consumer choices or travel choices, holiday choices, all those kind of things which can feed into helping.
That's it. I'm glad I wrote that and that you've said that back, and it's nice to hear that my voice from whenever I wrote it 5, 6, 7 years ago, that I had that core is still there, and I think that then that helps me to put into this conversation something that I think is really important, which is the voice of the land. I go out into the land frequently, and partly that's just for R&R and just ecotherapy level 1, I would call it. Being out there, breathing, really releasing myself from the stresses of work or motherhood or whatever. But there's frequently a kind of touching, like, am I still in the right ballpark? Am I still all right to be gently saying to people, this is what I'm offering isn't necessarily about healing the individual. What I'm really interested in is healing the relationship. And the individuals then have a healing experience through that. But that's where the other centered focus comes in, where it's like, it's not transactional. It's not about me. It's about the we. It's about the they. And that's where I keep saying to the land, am I going about this in a okay way? Is this the right way? Is this the right thing? And the land keeps on just saying, yeah, this is what's necessary. This is really what's necessary. And I think it keeps reminding me about that. There's a charity that I work for and with. I'm on the board of directors of this American charity, actually, if you have American listeners, called Radical Joy for Hard Times. And it's been going for about 13 or 14 years. And it's a really simple ethos, which is our landscape is getting more and more wounded, polluted, challenged. And pretty much every one of us, apart from if we lived in the depths of the Amazon rainforest, are living on a landscape that is challenged. And so what we can either do is kind of blinker ourselves to it and just have our acceptable place where our pond is and our nature, and or we can say, sometimes I need to open up to actually how difficult and how challenged this landscape is. And the way that I can do that without going completely mad and without losing my sense of soul and without falling into the most painful grief is to go to that place and to say, I see you, but you are not orphaned. I can feel the earth underneath. I can feel the resiliency. I can feel the pores, the spores and the pollen on the wind that's going to nestle in these little cracks and turn into beautiful flowers. And you are not orphaned. You are not alone. And then just making something from what you find there, a little bird, a little mandala, or singing a song, so that there's this action, this transaction of relationship to this challenged place. And what it does for me is, and for other people, and countless people now have done this all over the world, what constantly keeps on coming up is that there's a sense of, although everything's huge and painful and difficult, and it's also painful and difficult in me because I'm living this too, in these moments, I can give something beautiful to somewhere that's not so beautiful, that's damaged, that's in pain. And in turn, I receive something that feels okay. And it really grounds me, and it reminds me that it's the humans that are doing or going to or being in relationship, but everybody gets better. The earth knows it's not orphaned. The landscape, that polluted part of the river, or that old factory, or that that dump,
fly-tipped dump,
it's no longer just half destroyed. It's actually still important to that individual or that group of individuals, and that in itself can then engender, as you say, behavioral change. Because if more people say, it's not okay to treat the world like this, it's not okay to do this, what then happens is behavior change comes, and actions and activism, which is then thus supported by a much safer way, a much more resilient and grounded way to be in relationship to the earth.
That's beautiful. And I think I've taken up an hour of your time. So unless there's anything that you particularly feel that, we haven't covered and that you wanted to address, or about your plans for the future, if there's anything else that you wanted to add.
I think I've covered it all. And thank you very much for your wonderful questions and reflections. And just to say that there, a lot of us are coming to a place where we recognize that there's challenges right now and in the future. And we don't have to sort of experience that on our own. We're not in a bubble. We can learn from the people who came before through myths, through stories, through poetry, through talking to each other, but also the earth itself has just so much to give us and to offer us. And we in turn learn about ourselves, and we can just feel a little bit more confident in our own decisions. So yeah, it can sometimes feel overwhelming, but actually, hopefully there are ways that we can feel supported in the future and in our practices right now.
Being grounded. I love the sense that the kind of the transcendent is there in the immanent, that the groundedness, the presentness, the beingness, the soil is we like to look to the stars and the sun and the sky, but it seems to me an important balance to recognize that this is what births us and supports us. And yeah, it would be it's wonderful to know that there are people who are developing that relationship and working towards a healthier earth.
That's
thank you.
That's wonderful, and thank you so much. And that's a lovely another conversation we can have another time about transcendence and descendants. And
I'd really like to have that conversation.
Yeah, so yeah, very descending right now, and it's actually surprisingly beautiful. You know, it's great. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for being on Shrink Wrap Radio.
Yeah, it's been wonderful. Thank you.